Martha was a passenger pigeon who died 110 years ago. The passenger pigeon was once the most populous bird in North America, perhaps in the world, with a peak population of up to 9 billion birds. They congregated and traveled in huge flocks of millions of birds. On witnessing such a flock, ornithologist John James Audubon wrote, "The air was literally filled with pigeons. The light of noonday was obscured as by an eclipse, and with a noise like thunder, they rushed in a compact mass." Passenger pigeons were a hypersocial species. They seemed to prefer crowded conditions and may not have bred well in small, lonely bands. Passenger pigeons were sustainably hunted for meat for several centuries, both by Native Americans and by early European settlers. But in the 1800s, the hunt was commercialized, and the numbers killed increased dramatically. By the 1890s, passenger pigeons were rare. The last wild passenger pigeon is thought to have been shot in 1901, leaving only a few small populations of captive birds, including 3 at the Cincinnati Zoo. One of these was Martha. In 1909, Martha and her 2 male companions at the Cincinnati Zoo became the only known surviving passenger pigeons. One of the males died later that year, and the next died the next year. Martha had become an endling, or the last of her species, and her last 4 years were spent alone. She died on September 1st, 1914. In 1914, humans had hunted the passenger pigeon into extinction, removing an entire species from the face of the earth. I'm a bit sad that none of us will ever have the opportunity to see the spectacle of passenger pigeons. But I'm way more sad when I imagine what Martha may have felt as an extremely social bird that was unable to see another of her kind for the last 4 years of her life. You may wonder what this story has to do with climate justice, since the extinction of passenger pigeons was not due to climate change. But the tagline of the climate justice revival is "Reimagine together from an extractive age to a new era." The extinction of passenger pigeons is absolutely an example of humans being extractive. Hunting a species to extinction and climate change both have roots in extractive systems of harm and systemic oppression. And it is clear today that climate change is dramatically increasing the risk of extinction for many species. In her invitation to the first ever Unitarian Universalist Climate Justice Revival, Reverend Dr. Sophia Betancourt stated that the work of climate justice encompasses many more specific kinds of justice and rights, including racial justice, immigrant rights, reproductive justice, and animal rights. I was so grateful that animal rights was included because, in my view, the beings that most need justice and compassion in our world are animals other than humans. This is not to say that other types of justice are not important to me. They absolutely are. But my calling, I believe my primary purpose in life, is to advocate and care for non-human animals, both wild and domestic. Yesterday, I attended the Climate Justice Revival at the UUs of San Mateo, and in the first activity of the day, we each drew and shared a rich picture of our community thriving in the future. My partner in this activity shared a picture in which the peninsula was almost covered in trees, and coastside farm workers were happy and content because their needs were being met. I took a more global approach, including enough sea ice for walruses to safely haul out and rest on without being too crowded, and deer and wild turkey that people could sustainably and humanely hunt to occasionally complement an otherwise plant-based diet. instead of regularly eating animals mass-produced on factory farms, since that is harmful to both animals and the climate. When my partner's only response to my picture was that I should come to her neighborhood because it had way too many deer, I was disappointed. I suspect that people take up much more space than deer in most residential areas in San Mateo County, so I wonder why it's the deer that are perceived as being too numerous in this shared habitat. When I told her that her comment about too many deer was hurtful to me, she doubled down with complaints about them eating everyone's plants and causing hazards on the street, and I felt like my perspective was dismissed. Later in the day, in a different group activity, we mapped challenging realities in our community and the many connections between them. Poor conditions for farm workers and limited habitat for wild animals, such as deer, were both included. So issues that both my previous partner and I had identified earlier in our pictures were validated. After that, we brainstormed solutions, and I made the suggestion of agricultural systems that are humane and sustainable for both humans and animals. It was rewarding to identify a solution that addressed at least some of both my previous partner's concerns and mine. The climate justice revival helped me better understand that climate justice work truly is intersectional. To be successful in this work, we must lean into our UU values, honor everyone's passions for justice, and relate to everyone with respect. Perhaps that's what keeping love at the center of our climate justice work really means.
One of the goals of the climate justice revival yesterday was to build closer relationships between Unitarian Universalists in San Mateo County. And part of that was we partnered with the Unitarian Universalists of San Mateo. And Reverend Dr. Tovis Page, who's the minister there and who's also a member of this congregation, and we ordained her last year, we thought we wanted to try and bring each other's message to each other's congregation. So you're getting the better part of this deal, because now you're getting a video of Tovis and they're having to listen to me. So we're going to now have a video from Tovis.
UUFRC community, I'm the Reverend Tovis Page, who many of you know because you ordained me in 2023, for which I will be forever grateful. I now serve as the Transitional Worship and Pastoral Care Minister at the UU community in San Mateo. Bringing our sibling congregations together this weekend for the UU Climate Justice Revival represents a dream that Reverend Brian and I and others as well have had for a long time. A dream that UUFRC, UUSM, and the UU Coastside community would grow more connected to each other around our shared values and our work for love and justice in San Mateo County. And a dream that we would do so consciously and intentionally as part of the larger movement that is Unitarian Universalism. And as part of the even larger movement of people of every faith and no faith at all working together for a future where no person, no animal, no species, and no ecosystem is expendable. Working together for a future where all can flourish. It was so wonderful yesterday to be together at UUSM, about 40 of us here in this room and online, alongside thousands of other UUs from across the country and world. We imagined together, we faced the myriad challenges threatening the web of life right here in our own region. We brainstormed how we might make a difference together, drawing on our UU faith and resources, pooling our resources, practicing love and care, and making critical connections. Yesterday, we planted seeds that we will need to water and tend in the coming months and years, because the revival isn't a culmination. It is a continuation, a recommitment to a shared mission and purpose as Unitarian Universalists in a hurting world. The revival feels a bit like a culmination for those who worked so hard to make it possible. The small team of us from USM and UUFRC were sometimes overwhelmed in the lead up, even though the UUA team did so much work to make it as easy as possible for all of us. Truth be told, though, there were times I wondered if we should give up and pull out. We had to cancel our youth program because there weren't enough registrations, and it often felt just too hard, like we simply didn't have the resources to do it. But then as things came together this weekend, I had a realization. I realized that, of course, it was going to be difficult. The climate revival is totally countercultural. It's countercultural even for our UU congregations to come together for a purpose that isn't business as usual, church as usual, that asks us to think and act in new ways, to try new things, and to make new connections. None of that is going to feel particularly easy. We live in a society that prioritizes individual success, productivity, and consumption, one that peddles fear based on the twin lies of scarcity and separation, and keeps us running ever faster and more furiously on our hamster wheels of business as usual. Our congregations are impacted by this mentality too. We often become like hamsters on our congregational hamster wheels. We get preoccupied trying to keep our congregations afloat, feeling that anxiety around scarcity, trying to do more and offer more with modest budgets, small staffs, and overextended volunteers. It sometimes feels like we're on that hamster wheel, watching horrifying images of what's happening in our world or feeling the impacts directly ourselves while trying to run faster and do more without pausing to consider other ways of relating to what is happening, to consider what we are doing with our feelings of fear and anxiety, what we are doing with the resources we do have, and how we might address what is happening in ways that are both nourishing and effective. The how we want to address what's happening in our world is where I think spirituality and religion come in. Because if we try to address the overwhelming and intersecting crises of our times simply by technological fixes or by buying the next best green product or working ourselves in our silos, driven by fear, we will fail. My friends, we have to do climate justice differently, and that's what the revival is all about. Taking a step back together, looking at the big picture, making critical connections between issues and between communities and movements, and building the foundation for collective action that is both nourishing and effective. So my friends, thank you for being here. Thank you for being you. Thank you for caring. Let's keep showing up, rooted in our UU faith and values, and let's keep growing our connections for the benefit of all. May it be so.
So inviting us to begin a new day. And we've laid out between the prayer and Barbie's reflection and other stories the hardship that we're experiencing with climate change. It's not an easy time. But one of the histories of religious revivals is a recommitment, a rejuvenation, and a remotivation to engage our values and to create the world we want. Not the world as it is, not the world we fear and imagine might be in the future, but the world we wish. And that's what that song invites us to do. What do we acknowledge so many of the good things that actually do happen that never make the news. The workers in the field, the teachers in the classroom, the preacher saying the sacred word. Thanks, John. But one of the things revivals did was it was spirit-filled. And revivals have an interesting history within Unitarian Universalism, because our Unitarian ancestors did not like revivals. They were too emotional. We were rationalists. We wanted to bring reason to religion, which to a degree is good. Now, the Universalist side of our tradition really comes out the liberal Baptist traditions. They were all for the revivals. So no wonder we're confused as a religion, because you've got Unitarian Universalists come. It's kind of the left and right brains just can't handle this. But I think whatever we need now, I don't think we can rationalize our way into the future, because we can rationalize all sorts of things. We need to bring our values. We need to imagine the future we want and move towards it. We need to be spirit-filled. We need to bring joy. Because you hear all the hardships, the species extinction, the climate change, the storms that we just had in Florida, the fires we've had in California. It can be heartbreaking. But we must always connect to our joy. We must always connect to that which sustains life, because that allows us to hold the difficulties that we have. So I say, let's bring intense emotions, but let's bring intense emotions of joy, of commitment, of working together. Our Unitarian values of interdependence is critical in this. Our seventh principle was the interdependent web of all existence of which we are part. Our new values that we have adopted is that we honor the interdependent web of all existence with reverence for the great web of life, and with humility we acknowledge our place in it. And I remember a good friend of mine who was a research scientist in ecology. She did not like the word environment. She always said human beings would separate themselves from the environment. She was an ecologist because it recognized that we are part of the environment, not some separation from it. So we do need to recommit, rejuvenate, and re-energize our climate work. And we need to have some image of the future. It's an act of imagination to want, what's the world we want? And one of the exercises we did yesterday was to imagine the world we wanted in 2050. And I'll have to be honest, when I first did this exercise in preparing for this about 30 years ago, we had to draw a rich picture of the environment with no words. And I thought, oh no, not drawing. Oh. But they encouraged us to do, and it was really quite insightful. Like, what did we pick out to draw for a rich picture for the environment we wanted? And it was great to see the three youth there, because even though we had to cancel a youth program, 3 of the youth from our congregation actually came and attended the first half of the adult portion. And one thing was heartbreaking. One of them drew a gun with a cross out of it. Because our children are growing up with that as a threat in the school. I never thought about guns. Granted, I did grow up in Britain where we can't really shoot. But that was came up with them. Of course, there was bicycles and public transport and animals. Barbie talked about a deer. The pictures were really rich because, and especially when you looked at other people's, because the ones you had were your own perspective. But I remember going and looking at Zev Gosling, who's the Tovis' son, and I thought, he's got a bicycle on it. I ride my bike every day, and I didn't put a bike in my future environment. So that's where the collaboration is important, because if we are going to do this work, we need to collaborate. And it's always, but there's so much human needs. How can I find time for the human needs and care for the environment? And we're starting with Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur in the next week. And it's a beautiful story from the Jewish tradition. And I relate to this story because it's a frustrated dad with his young child. The young father was trying to get some work done. I remember when my daughter was about 4, she used to ask me, "Dad, are you working today?" That's how she saw a minister work, was type. You know, of course, this father, like myself and many times, was really frustrated because he really needed time to work. So he found this map of the world, and he tore it up and threw it in the ground and asked his child, who was like 2 or 3, assemble that, because he thought that will take her forever, because she doesn't know where countries are in the world. 2 minutes later, the child came back with it fully, correctly assembled. And the dad goes, "How did you know that? You don't know where the countries are in the world." And she said, "Oh, there was a picture of a person in the back. So I assembled the person, and through that, I repaired the world." So by repairing the person, it repaired the world. Now, those of you who pay attention know I've told you that story before. But I want to put a twist on it. I think with the climate justice revival, perhaps if we repair the world, we will start repairing people. Perhaps if we repair the world, we'll start repairing people. Because I think there's a mental health crisis going on. I look at teenagers now. I look at young adults now who've gone through the pandemic in these formative years. They carry existential angst about the welfare of this planet. We need to repair the world to repair the people. It's not an either-or. We need both. There's a mental health crisis. There's a loneliness crisis. There's a climate crisis. They are connected. So when we do mental health work, when we do justice work to repair the planet, that is mental health work. There's an intersection there. And that's what we have to do for social justice. We have to find the intersections between social justice issue and climate issues. And if we can find that intersection, that pivot point, that's where we can have the most influence. And that's the vital work, because we human beings are limited, and as my friend and colleague, Reverend Tovis said, we're on this hamster wheel. We all have limited time. I can imagine many of you would love to have been at that climate justice revival yesterday, but you didn't have time. You had something else to do. And I honour that. That's not a criticism. I know we all do. I know some people had to leave. I was organising it, and I barely had time to attend. So I understand that. So that's why we have to be effective in our justice work. Where can we find those intersections of justice issues and focus on being effective around those? We do need to repair people and repair the planet. We do need to repair the planet and heal people. We need to do that work together. And the Christian thinker, Frederick Buechner, said, "The place God calls you is the place where your deep gladness and the world's deep hunger meet." The place where your deep gladness and the world's deep hunger meet. Can you put up the slide now of the sacred circles? One of the activities we did was these sacred circles at the end. And it's 3 circles with what my community needs, what brings me joy, and what I have to offer. What your community needs, what brings you joy, and what do you have to offer? We need to find tasks, objectives that meet all of those. We need to bring our joy to the work. We need to get joy from the work. We can't just be drained from it because it's not sustainable. But it needs to be connected with what the community needs, not what individuals need. And it needs to be, what can I offer that perhaps few other people could offer? And one of the things we had to do yesterday was identify a word that connected with each of those. And this was at the end of the process where we discussed all the different visioning, our future, the problems. What could I bring to address each of those? And this sacred circles I've sent, there's a bunch of them where Bruce is sitting on them probably right now. So I invite you, if you want some, to take some with you and answer this for yourself. And we had to come up with words. They'll be on the table on the way out. I will also send it out in groups.io, and you can pick it up there. I invite you to take this and reflect on it. You're not going to have all the groundwork that we did in building towards this. It was actually Debbie who was here who led that session beautifully. Thank you. I thanked you all earlier, but you weren't here, so I want to thank you now, Debbie. But really look at that. And my 3 words were, and the other thing about this diagram was hope is the intersection between the 2 circles, and love is the intersection of all 3. Love is central to this work. Love of self, love of one another, love of planet, and love of all life on it. Bill McKibben is a long-time environmentalist. And one of the biggest things he said when asked, what can we do about climate change? He said, we have to stop thinking that we're individuals. The biggest thing we can do for climate change is that we're not individuals. We are members of a religious community. The work we need to do is build communities of communities to address climate change. No one of us can do it by ourselves. As I mentioned back in April, each one of us could reduce our carbon footprint to 0, and it's really not going to make a difference. There needs to be advocacy. There needs to be mental health work. There needs to be racial justice work. There needs to be reproductive justice work. There needs to be income inequality work. There needs to be housing work. We need to do that, and we can only do all of that as a community. So we need to build communities of communities to address climate justice and all its intersections. And we need to do it in a sustainable, effective, joy-filled, spirit-filled, and be a justice-seeking force to heal our planet, and through that heal ourselves. Like that little child, if we repair the world, we repair the person. If we repair the person, we repair the world. And we need to do that with one another. And religion is ultimately about what you're willing to commit yourself to. What are you willing to commit yourself to? I invite you, each of you, to think that. Take these sheets of paper, write it down. What are you willing to commit yourself to address climate justice and its intersections?